Hello everyone, and welcome to the May Literary Modiin author event. I'm Julie Zuckerman, author of the Book of Jeremiah. Today is day 590 of our interminable reality, and every day here is very complex, politically, emotionally. And I know that you all join with me in the fervent hope that we will soon see all 58 of our hostages returned home and the ability for everyone in the region to live in peace and security and dignity. At the end of our session, I'll say a few more words about this, but for now, I want to turn to our main event, which is something joyful, and that is the release of new Jewish books into the world, even when the stories are sometimes difficult to hear. Literary Modiin got started in June of 2019, 6 years ago almost, as a way to bring English, Israel-based authors to the large community of English readers in Modiin. And we had a few in-person events. And then when the pandemic hit, we switched to Zoom, which has allowed us to hear from authors from all over the world and welcome attendees from all over. So welcome. This is our 61st event. I am committed to keeping Literary Modiin free for everyone, but if anyone would like to support the series in some small way, you can click on the Buy Me a Coffee link that I'll send in the email tomorrow. And if you can't, that's fine too. The format of today's event, for those of you who are new here, is that each author speaks for about 15 minutes, and then we open it up to questions. And we have a large attendance, so everybody here is on mute. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, if you have any questions for the authors, put them in the general chat. If you have any technical difficulties, you can send a private note to me in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our first author. Helen Schary Motro is an American-Israeli writer and attorney whose award-winning writing spans the gamut of opinion journalism in the world's leading press, including the New York Times, Christian Science Monitor, Boston Globe, Haaretz, and Newsweek. She is the recipient of the Common Ground Award for Journalism in the Middle East. She taught law at Tel Aviv University and was a columnist for the Jerusalem Post. She is the author of the nonfiction Maneuvering Between the Headlines and the new collection of short fiction, The Right to Happiness, After All They Went Through, which came out from Amsterdam Publishers. Her short stories, poetry, and essays appear in anthologies and magazines, and she received her BA from the University of Chicago and her JD and LLM degrees from NYU School of Law. She lives in Israel with her family. And I'll just say a personal note, which is that Helen and I were in a writing group together in Tel Aviv. So I had the good fortune of hearing some of, reading a few scenes from a few of the stories that are in her collection a bunch of years ago. So that was, it was a treat to reread them again. So now I'm gonna introduce Helen and you can take it away.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Julie, for inviting me to participate in this really unique literary salon, and also really for the lovely introduction. I'm so happy to be here. My book, which is a collection of short stories, each protagonist is a survivor of the Holocaust, or a child of survivors, or sometimes they're both in one story. All of my stories take place at the end of the war. How the Holocaust affected the generation that went through the war and the generations afterwards, the ramifications. The stories do not take place during the Nazi conflagration. All the stories are distinct and they're linked only by a common theme. And if I had to say what that theme was, I would really say it's how people overcome trauma, trauma lived or trauma inherited. Some of these people embrace life, but others continue internalizing their personal catastrophe. They can't all get over it, and some only get over it partially. The title of my book expresses the dual themes. On the one hand, rebuilding life, the right to happiness, and on the other hand, the effects of a painful past after all they went through. Sometimes these are combined in the same story and even in the same character. But I believe that my book goes beyond the Holocaust and will appeal to many people who don't have a special niche interest in this terrible event of human history, because it has to deal, I believe, with the human condition, as does all of literature. The stories deal with loneliness, with love, with reconciling our pasts with our present. I'd like to highlight a few of the stories and read a few excerpts. In the story called The Smoker, it deals with a little girl called Anna, and she collects half-smoked cigarette butts from her parents' ashtrays in the living room after they've had parties. She hides these butts in a toy chest in her room, and why she does this is because she has heard stories about her elegant grandmother in pre-war Krakow, who used to go to the opera and smoke in the intermission, and she held a beautiful ivory cigarette holder. Now, the grandmother died in the war, and Anna is just trying to give her honor and really become like her grandmother. And so, in secret, Anna takes out her cigarettes in her room and she pretends to smoke them while she looks in the mirror. She fears to be discovered, and one day she is. And it's then that she learns the real truth about her grandmother's addiction and her grandmother's terrible death in the ghetto. Another story talks about the dilemma of Gideon, who's the principal of a reform school, and he's also the son of a survivor. He emulates his hero, Janusz Korczak, the great Polish educator, and he has a portrait of Korczak on the wall of his office. Gideon takes his juvenile offenders on a memory trip to a German concentration camp. He has rehabilitated these boys who have committed serious offenses. But will the former delinquents justify Gideon's faith in them, or will he fail? The story, The King of Yiddish, centers on a former Yiddish actor. In pre-war Vilna, Sali plays classical theater, including Shakespeare, and he's due to open in Hamlet. But then, September 1st, 1939, the war breaks out. Sali survives with his wife, but they lose their little son, Horatio. After the war, they come and they live in the Bronx in a lower middle class tenement. Sali can't find work. There is no market for Yiddish actors in New York. Even on Second Avenue, they tell him Yiddish actors are a dime a dozen. Sully goes to night school, but he finds English very difficult. Finally, he lands the job that he loves. He becomes a radio announcer for a Yiddish radio station, and he works there for over 30 years. But what will happen, because Yiddish is disappearing and the audience is shrinking? One day, the boss calls Sali into the office and tells him that the station has been sold to new corporate owners. And I'll read you a little excerpt from that scene. "Don't lose your head, Sali," he cautions himself. He raises himself in the chair and sticks out his chin like before a big speech. "So, when do I get to meet them, the new bosses?" he asks. "Let me explain something, Sali," Adele says. "Something basic about economics. The bottom line of a radio station is revenue, not literature, not nostalgia, not charity, revenue. There's just no more sponsorship left for Yiddish. None. Sorry, my friend, times change. Our listeners speak Russian, Vietnamese, and above all, Spanish." Sali feels the axe falling. But in this story, this character, Sali, he's a real survivor. And as things go on, he's able to reinvent himself once again for a different trajectory. Sometimes I'm asked, are these characters in the stories real? This is not a memoir. And I guess it's a compliment because I've created people who are all fictional. There is no Malka Shulamis. There is no Mordechai Taubman or Hilda Gruenstein, but there are people like them. It's no surprise that I chose to write a book about the Holocaust because I myself am a child of survivors. I grew up surrounded by Holocaust survivors. All my parents' friends came from Europe. My life had many other facets, but the influence of the Holocaust was large upon me. I was surrounded by Holocaust secrets, Holocaust stories, and hints. When writing the book, I felt it was important to be faithful to history and geography and win the trust of my readers. So, for example, I checked the Brooklyn and the Bronx subway system and the lineup of stops because some of the stories had characters who went on the subway. I read up on the difficulties of refugees to get a visa to enter the United States before the war, how many had to make a halfway stop of several years in places like Cuba. And for the story Homecoming on Riverside, I made sure of the paths in Riverside Park and the layout of the streets on the Upper West Side. In that story, a little girl is so lonely that she fantasizes her murdered grandparents back to life. And I'll read you the beginning of Homecoming on Riverside. As soon as Henny spied her dead grandparents climbing out of the taxi, she raced across the side street and down West End Avenue toward her building. The yellow cab had just pulled up in front of her building's canopy. With her sharp child's vision, she recognized them at once from 2 blocks away, even through the heavy snow. Henny ran towards her grandparents, face in the wind, her breath stabbed between her ribs as she raced down the deserted pavement. Through the corner of her eye, she read, "Don't walk," the sign at the crosswalk flashing blood red. The hard plastic handle of her book bag banged against her knees. Icy pinpricks hit her hot cheeks, melted, and ran down beneath her collar. The grandparents would be bewildered by the lobby's twisting corridors and their multiple elevators, the front elevator, the back elevator, the service car. She could almost hear them struggling to ask, did they have the right address? Did their son Ignaz Kanowitz live there? They wouldn't know to use his new name, that their Ignaz had become Eugene, and that Kanowitz was reborn as Cain. If she didn't get there right now to steer them, the doorman would turn them away out into the snow. This time she would catch them for sure. 83rd Street, 82nd Street. She ran, panting. She was almost there. "I'll take you upstairs," she'd shout. "I know who you want." For once, there would be no empty chairs in their living room. I also got materials and ideas from my own parents. So, for example, on the 4th of July, when there were fireworks, or on Independence Day, my mother never went outside. She never went to see them because the explosion of the fireworks reminded her of bombardments that she had gone through in Warsaw and lived through during the war. She had an instinctive, fearful body reaction to any loud noise. I incorporated this fear that my mother had into the story called The Parade. And the little girl who's the heroine of this story had a life very different from mine. Her parents hardly speak English. They hold menial jobs, and she's a charity student in a religious girls' yeshiva in Brooklyn. Malka Shalamis watches TV, and dreams of becoming more American. And here is the beginning of the story, The Parade. Television was my refuge. Every afternoon, I plopped down on our leatherette ottoman, avoiding the scratchy tears in the vinyl, watching our black and white set, and eating handfuls of frosted flakes dry out of the package. The programs pictured perfect American families, and I willed myself into the action. I became the child playing Chinese checkers in the den on the slip-covered couch, running outside to buy a popsicle from the ice cream truck, dressing up on Halloween, none of which existed in my real life. My best holiday of the year was Thanksgiving because it was my favorite TV day. Even Slatkin Yeshiva was closed. I spent the morning immersed in the most glorious spectacle ever to be devised, the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, a 3-hour-long cavalcade. I didn't move from the ottoman. I sat as close to the TV as I could get, my nose almost touching the 17-inch screen. Most glorious was the colossal white torso of Snoopy, the dog, floating like the incarnation of a beautiful dream. I was in Brooklyn, New York, technically on the same city as the parade. I felt I could almost reach out and touch it, but it might have been on another planet. From the time I was in the third grade, I begged my mother, "Next week is the parade. Can we go? Can we go?" But she always demurred, saying, "That's not for us, Zisela, leaving Brooklyn, traveling so far for such nonsense." "But why not us? Why not?" I cajoled. "We never do anything. There's no school, and you don't have to work, and there's nothing to do. You can see Macy's with your own eyes, the world's largest store." I suspected it was the journey that frightened her, that we would have to take the subway from our home in Brooklyn and travel on the train into Manhattan because Mama was afraid of trains. I knew that without being told why. Actually, Mama was afraid of a lot of things, especially loud noises. When the buzzer rang from downstairs, Mama's body tensed. If I was in the room, she looked around as if searching for a place to hide me. She jumped up when she heard a police siren. At the wail of an ambulance, she started, her eyes pools of instant fear, hands flying up to her cheeks. After a moment, she would relax, embarrassed. When I reached the sixth grade, I began to beg early to go up to the parade from the beginning of November, but without much hope. Suddenly, out of the blue, my mother agreed. Sometimes surprising personal experiences also jumped up as material for stories. Once I had the good luck to go on a short vacation to the Greek island of Rhodes, and I expected it to be just beaches and flowers and markets, and it really was. But I also came across a memorial there, and I learned about the massacre of the Jews of Rhodes. The Jews had lived in Rhodes for 2,000 years since the Maccabees. But in 1943, when the Nazis arrived in Rhodes, they gathered all the Jews in the island and shipped them by boat to Athens, and they hardly gave them drinking water. Many perished on the journey. When they got to Athens, they were sent to Auschwitz on train, and most of them died. I created a story of a life-affirming character, and his name is Shmulik Capelouto. I chose the name Capelouto because it was one of the family names listed on the memorial in Rhodes. Shmulik personifies rejuvenation. He's a taxi driver of a beat-up cab. He listens to beautiful Ladino music, and he moonlights on a tractor picking oranges. Shmulik adopts a lonely mother and her crippled child, and he shows them the magic and the fragrance of oranges and orange groves. The great short story writer Sherwood Anderson said this: "The whole glory of writing lies in the fact that it forces us out of ourselves and into the lives of others." I hope that my stories make this true for my readers. Thank you for allowing me to share with you.
That was great, Helen. Thank you so much. Beautiful, beautiful readings and beautiful stories.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to now introduce our second author. Howard Lovy is an author, book editor, and journalist who specializes in Jewish issues. As a book editor, he works with authors of fiction and nonfiction with a particular focus on Jewish themes and voices. He is also the nonfiction editor at Judith, a magazine that amplifies Jewish perspectives, and hosts podcasts for the, this is separate from Judith, who hosts podcasts for the Alliance of Independent Authors. His commentaries have appeared in the Jerusalem Post, Long Reads, Publishers Weekly, the Jewish Daily Forward, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, and other publications. His novel, Found and Lost, The Jake and Kate Story, is an exploration of music, aging, faith, and second chances. So, Howard, let me ask you to unmute, and I will spotlight you. There you go. You can take it away.
Hi, thank you, Julie. It's great to be here, and it's difficult to follow such a powerful author. That was wonderful, Helen. Thank you. Um, so yeah, this is this piece of fiction, I should say, is out of character for me. And even my wife said, I can't believe you wrote this," because I've been writing nonfiction my entire career. And this was my first foray into fiction. And I discovered that I could say a little more about reality through fiction than nonfiction. So it all worked out. First, just a little bit about me. I spent the first half of my career as a journalist covering everything from local news to business and science and religion. And I've written about Jewish issues all my life. In the late 1990s, I was managing editor for the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. After the second Intifada began in 2000, I kind of burned out and stepped away from Jewish journalism for about 16 years. Then in 2016, as anti-Semitism began rising again, I picked up my pen and started writing about Jewish issues for Publishers Weekly, JTA, the Allgemeiner, and other publications. And then I got into publishing when I became executive editor of Forward Reviews, and then shifted to book editing. And lately, I've been writing a great deal about anti-Semitism in the literary world, and I'm working on a book about fighting anti-Semitism. Which brings me to this first work of fiction, which, like I say, that a character for me. It's called Found and Lost, the Jake and Kate story. I wrote it a couple of years ago, and at the time, I didn't know about all the tropes that are expected of different kinds of genres. So I've been told that this is a second chance romance, although I have never read any of those any books in those genres. And people who are hardcore romance readers would be angered by this book because it doesn't follow all the tropes. So it's just a book. So we'll call it that. I wrote it because I wanted to get out of my comfort zone and just tell a story, something rooted in memory and music and human connection. I also wrote it before October 7, 2023. And today, I'm not sure if I could have written the same novel. It's optimistic. It imagines a world where two people with deep differences, culturally, spiritually, emotionally, still find something lasting between them. And the story is a snapshot not only of my protagonists, Jake and Kate, but of where my mind was at the time. So a couple of years ago, I was listening to music on my headphones while training to run a half marathon. When I was hit with this idea, it was simple enough. What if a song from 40 years ago accidentally went viral today, forcing reluctant middle-aged musicians into the spotlight? That's what happens to Jake and Kate. They had a brief, intense musical partnership and romance in the summer of 1985. Then it ended abruptly, and they lost touch. In 2025, a viral video of their old songs brought them back into the public view and eventually back into each other's lives. But it's not a simple reunion. They're carrying decades of regret, misunderstanding, and change. And I was so excited about this plot that I ran home, told my wife I was writing a novel, and spent the next 4 or 5 months working on it. And the result was this book. Originally, the scenes from 1985 were going to be just the backstory, but then I discovered there was more I wanted to say about the passage of time and the difference between who we are as teenagers and who we become as middle age. I've always been fascinated by stories about what happens to people over time. Maybe it's the impact that time has had on me as I age. I don't know. So that became half the book. Then I added a third layer, a documentary that tells the story through memory. Two people who haven't seen each other in 40 years and won't even appear in the same room. The setting draws a little bit from my own background. I was a camp counselor at Interlochen, and where I live in northern Michigan in the mid 80s. It's an arts camp, and it became the emotional and musical core of the book. Jake and Kate, the protagonists, meet their opposites. Jake is Jewish and rough around the edges. Kate is a classically trained violinist who's Christian and searching for a simple kind of faith. But when they play music together, it's magic. They finish each other's musical sentences. And at 18, Jake is pretty dismissive of Kate's spiritual searching. For Kate, faith was central. For Jake, his Jewish identity mattered to him, but he was more of the kind of an atheist who didn't understand a great deal about Christianity, really. And young Kate was unsure of herself, and Jake was very, very sure of himself. And those roles kind of reversed in middle age. Kate was no longer a seeker. She found a comfortable version of her religion with how her life turned out. Jake, on the other hand, had been haunted by this relationship for 40 years and became a little less strident about differences in religion, and realized that their connection kind of went beyond that. There's still an uneasiness about their faith, but the way they make music together kind of overrides everything else. And I guess that mirrors something I've experienced myself. But when you're young, everything seems black and white. As you age, things get more complicated, more gray. And that idea of finding connection, of working through regret, misunderstanding, and difference to make something beautiful together feels meaningful right now on many different levels. Part of this book that I'm writing about anti-Semitism is kind of nostalgic for a time when we all were on the same page to free Soviet Jewry, for example. And so, whether you're Orthodox, Reform, conservative, or liberal politically, we all agreed on that. So there's kind of a metaphor in there. Well, this novel moves between their early years, their present day selves, and the documentary being made about them. It's about memory, it's about fame, it's about how people remember the same story differently. And the scene I'm about to read takes place in the present day. Kate was rehearsing with Jake for their reunion tour, but her husband and daughter have convinced her to leave, to call it all off. She's trying to move on, but then she hears Jake's guitar after 40 years of silence. And this is Kate's internal monologue. It's a tiny pause in the action of the book. And there's a song in there, but I'll just say the lyrics. I will not burden anybody with their singing voice. I will say that the character of people have asked me, the character of Jake is not me. I played clarinet in middle school, but that was the extent of my musical training. But I ran a lot of this past actual musicians who say that it seemed very real to them. Caitlin Doyle Fitzgerald walked arm in arm with her husband, Brian, toward one of the many small interlocking parking lots nestled among the trees. They were among a few scattered people making their way back to their cars. Kate laughed to herself how nobody recognized her when she walked with her husband. With Brian, Kate was out of context. Without Jake, she was just another middle-aged lady with bright red hair, probably bottled, walking with her even older husband. Only an hour earlier, boys and men had been whistling at her, and girls and women admiring her, chanting her name. It wasn't real, she thought. It was a silly dream. She was about to allow Brian to take her arm and again guide her to her car when she heard it, the unmistakable sound of Jake's guitar. Then his voice was carried on the wind. In a dream, I heard a voice, a calling that gave me no choice. Your music is a sacred gift, a calling that will always lift. So let us play with all our might, with passion, love, and holy light. Our voices soaring, reaching high, a choir that touches the sky. Kate covered her face with her hands. When she removed them, the trees, the dirt, the road, the distant lake all seemed to spin around her, and her eyesight began to go dim. Brian caught her to prevent her from falling and guided her over to a bench to sit. Damn you, Jacob, she thought. You're manipulating me. The awareness did no good, though. It was working. Had Jake really changed, and was he willing to accept her spiritually as well as physically? At the age of 18, Jake could be very cruel and dismissive of her Christian beliefs. But could you really condemn a man for the arrogance of his youth? Was the song he heard Jake's way of telling her that this time things would be different? But it didn't matter. Faith means your actions follow a calling, no matter what others think and how they act. Kate knew that something bigger than the two of them was at work when they worked together, especially when they made music. Individually, they were average. Together, they moved the universe. How could this not be God speaking through them? But that was what she believed 40 years ago, too. And rather than face it, Jake had turned and run. Well, she never really learned the real reason Jake had disappeared. Perhaps there were other factors beyond her awareness. She was sure of one thing. This song was Jake's apology to her, and a final reminder that this time it was she who would be running away from God's command. But like the biblical story of Jonah, there was no place they could truly hide if God wanted to speak through them. She could run in fear, even enter the belly of a great fish, or she could accept her destiny, her divine calling, and return to Jake. Kate knew she was being manipulated by her husband and Jake. Both were telling her what they wanted, what they believed she wanted to hear. But to Kate, there was only one still small voice to whom she would ultimately listen. The same one the prophet Elijah heard when he had fled to a cave on Mount Horeb in fear for his life in 1 Kings 19:11 to 13. The Lord spoke to Elijah not through powerful wind, earthquake, or fire, but through a gentle whisper. And Jake's song entered and whispered to her as clearly as if she were there with him, gazing into his eyes. Jake used to have a Yiddish word for their silent communication. It was beshert, her destiny. So that moment kind of captures a lot of what the book is about. It's about music, faith, memory, regrets, and something more mysterious that defines logic or belief. And what does it really mean when your so-called soulmate challenges everything you think you believe? I try not to moralize. I'm not telling readers what to think. I just tell them what Jake thinks, what Kate thinks, and let the readers decide. And that's kind of the freedom fiction gave me after a career in journalism. And that's my spiel on that.
Thank you, Howard. That was great. That was great. Okay, let me introduce our third and final author for this evening or day, wherever you are. Rebecca Wolf is a former journalist everybody's a former journalist today, so am I. The former journalist whose fiction and essays have appeared in many publications, including Apricity and Tablet. She is a volunteer writing tutor for PEN America's prison writing program, and she lived in Jerusalem as a foreign student before attending Barnard College. She lives in New Jersey with her family. And this is her debut novel. So I will add your spotlight, and Rebecca, take it away.
Hey, thank you, Julie, for inviting me here today. And thank you to all of you for coming up to listen. As a debut author, it's especially heartwarming to receive this kind of amazing support from readers like you. Alive and Beating, see it, follows 6 people from diverse backgrounds and neighborhoods in Jerusalem, all of whom are awaiting transplants on the day that will forever change their lives. My book is inspired by a true story that happened 30 years ago in April 1995. My high school friend, Elisa Flato, and I were both abroad for college semesters. I was in London and she was in Jerusalem. A few days before Passover, she was on the way to a beach resort in Gush Katif, which at the time was still controlled by Israel, when a suicide bomber rammed his truck into her bus and exploded himself. She was mortally wounded with a critical brain injury, but her body remained intact, a perfect candidate to be an organ donor. Her father flew in from New Jersey, and together with his family and many rabbinic authorities, they made the then groundbreaking and heroic decision to donate Elisa's organs. Elisa was the first American tourist to be killed by an act of terror in Israel, and one of the first, if not the first, Orthodox Jewish organ donors. So her death was widely publicized. I arrived in Israel in time to watch Elisa's coffin get loaded into the cargo hold of the plane that would take her back to her native New Jersey for her funeral and burial. While that scene will be forever imprinted in my mind, it was the news conference the next day that has had the most lasting impact. Then Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin praising Elisa's family's heroic act and proclaiming, Elisa's heart is alive and beating here in Jerusalem. Elisa stayed at the top of my mind, but as a 20-year-old college student, I was thinking of her just as a good friend that I was mourning, not as a story to be told. I had planned to become a journalist. I wanted to be a war correspondent, not a fiction writer. I majored in political science with a concentration in terrorism, and in London, I was studying in the War Studies Department of King's College. I also worked on the Columbia Spectator while I was in college. And in fact, Julie, Ruth Franklin, a writer that you just had, was my editor-in-chief for one of my years on the paper. But it turns out that being a war correspondent is not a great job for a young Orthodox Jewish woman. So I got a job on Wall Street instead, working as a financial reporter for Dow Jones Newswires, which is the wire service of the Wall Street Journal. Once I became a mother, I decided to stay home with my kids, and the only writing I did was some light freelance work, mostly parenting and Jewish topics. But then about 10 years ago, with my children all in school full time, I started thinking about writing a book, and that book had to be about Elisa. My book is a tribute to Elisa, but I decided not to write her true story for two reasons. One, I didn't really feel like it was fair for me to write her story. That was up to her family. And the second is the journalist in me wanted to be able to tell a few other stories. So I wanted to be able to create organ recipients from all walks of life. So I have Leah, a Hasidic young woman, Yael, a daughter of Holocaust survivors, Hoda, a Palestinian hairdresser, David, an Iraqi restaurant owner, Severin, a Catholic priest, and Yusuf and Yosef, two teenage boys, one a Muslim and one a Jew. I really enjoyed the research process of writing this book. I'm a librarian's daughter, so I love to read, and these characters forced me to read books that I might otherwise have never looked at. For example, books written, strictly from a Palestinian perspective. I also read lots of these so-called death memoirs like Paul Kalanithi's When Breath Becomes Air, or The Bright Hour by Nina Riggs. Books like these to try to understand the perspective of someone with a terminal illness. I also spoke to many doctors, which as a Jewish person, super easy to find. And I interviewed lots of friends of mine who suffer from chronic illnesses. And I also watched lots of YouTube videos. So that helped with the medical part of it, and also a little bit with the religious part of it. In terms of the actual location, I know some of the Jerusalem neighborhoods that I wrote about, but others like Beit Hanina, I have never been to, so I relied on books and Google Earth to help me there. I would say that my hardest chapter to write was my chapter of the Palestinian hairdresser, for obvious reasons. As much as I tried really hard to be able to get into her perspective, I am a Jewish person. But I related to her very much as a mother. And so it was, and that's one of the themes that I hope would help make my book universal, that it doesn't really matter where we are, mothers care and worry for their children. And I hope that would sort of transcend boundaries. On the flip side, I would say my most enjoyable character to write was Severin, the Catholic priest, because even though he is the complete opposite of me as a man, as a priest, as a Catholic person, that was fun. I got to use my imagination and just try something totally different. And to me, he's one of my most joyous characters, I would say. The character I love most would be Tamar, my dialysis nurse in my first chapter, because she is such a positive person. And I think she represents a lot of the Israeli spirit of just trying to smile, even if you're sitting in a dialysis unit. I end most of my chapters, and definitely the end of the book, ambiguously, which I have gotten a lot of pushback for. And I'm sorry if anyone read the book and is annoyed about that, but I did it for two reasons. The first is that as a reader, Howard was sort of saying something like this: I like to give readers credit to take the book where they want to take it. So I don't always want to wrap things up. Also, in terms of organ donation, unfortunately, it really is ambiguous, even when you're on the operating table. There are times when someone thinks they are getting an organ, and then as they're about to do the surgery, something gets messed up and it doesn't happen. And in the case of my friend Elisa, two of her organ recipients actually died within 2 days of getting the organs. So there was that. And then finally, and this is a bit of a spoiler, so for anyone who didn't read the book, I'm sorry, but my last chapter, which is my heart chapter, ends with not knowing who got the heart, the Jewish boy or the Muslim boy. And that was very important for me, because I needed it to end with this feeling that we're all human beings. And I'll get to that later. I'm going to read a little bit from that. Publishing has been really hard. I'm a no-name debut author, so it probably would have been hard no matter what. I finished writing this book in the summer of 2022. I was lucky enough to get an agent 3 months later in December of 2022, and she wanted me to add a little extra, and then she started to send my book out Memorial Day 2023. But the summer is slow, and so, she only got a few comments back. Some of them were just the book isn't for them, but others were, well, I already represent someone named Rebecca who wrote about Israel, so I can't have another. Or even I have too many Jewish writers and I need a more diverse, roster. But she said, don't worry, in the fall, things will pick up. We'll see how it goes. And then literally on October 8th, 2023, she said, I'm not going to be able to publish this novel. So she suggested either I switch it so that my terrorist was Jewish and the victim was Palestinian, or I held on to it for about 5 to 10 years. And I mean, I couldn't do either one of those. This book took me about 4.5 years to write. It was almost 2 years of waiting to publish it. And I just said, I have to do it. So luckily, through a chain of different events, I was able to find a small publisher. I'm only his 10th book, but he got it out into the world for me. And now we're going to see where it goes. And it happened to be the timing of my friend's 30th, the 30th anniversary of her death. So that's been meaningful. I'm going to read for a minute the first few pages of my heart chapter, which is my last chapter. I saw her boobs when she leaned over, says Yusuf al-Najjar. He leans back against his pillow, closes his eyes, and smiles. It was a good day. Why do you always get all the luck? Asked Yosef Peretz from the bed across the room without looking up from playing Candy Crush on his phone. It's a Sunday evening in early April, and visiting hours are over for the day. No pretty girls ever come to visit me. I'm a babe magnet. What can I say? Yeah, right. She was probably your cousin or something. Yusuf laughs. She was actually, but who cares? I still saw boobs. Yosef laughs too, first just a chuckle, but then he dissolves into a fit of hysterical giggles. The jerking of his chest sets off one of the alarms, and a nurse runs in to check the monitors. Yo-yos, take it easy, she says. Don't make me run in here 100 times a day. Yusuf and Yosef are known as the yo-yos on the pediatric cardiology of Hadassah Medical Center. They've been there for a while, Yusuf nearly a month and Yosef almost 3, while they wait for heart transplants. Their wide blue room is sectioned off in the middle with yellow curtains that can separate the area into 2 rooms, but now the boys like to be together, so they keep them open. One wall is windowed with views of the green pine and cypress trees in the Jerusalem forest outside. The boys' beds are positioned opposite each other, and the walls are painted with aquarium murals to try to camouflage the many medical devices and machines. A giant red coral reef is painted just above Yosef's head, and Yusuf teases him that he looks like an underwater unicorn. One is an Arab, Yusuf, and the other is a Jew, Yosef, but both are teenage boys from Jerusalem, and they are so close in age, 16 and 15 respectively, and appearance, they might be brothers. The regular hospital staff is able to differentiate between the yo-yos, but when first meeting them, most people need to look at their charts to tell them apart. They both have dark hair, sparse facial fuzz, and naturally dark skin, although now they appear more ashen from their advanced cardiac diseases. Yosef crumples a sheet to his mouth to stifle his laughter. It's ironic that as he and Yusuf get weaker, their friendship gets stronger. Their friends' visits have become much less frequent, and even their families can't dedicate all day to sitting with them in the hospital. A lot of the time, it's just the yo-yos. Those flowers your cousin brought are really strong, says Yosef. I can smell them even through the sheet. The purple hyacinths are in an empty water bottle on the table next to Yusuf. I like them, he says. It reminds me that it's spring. I hate that we don't feel the weather in here. When they feel up to it, the boys are wheeled to the hospital garden for a few minutes each day. For early April, the weather has been unseasonably warm, and the blooming flowers and budding trees are a stark contrast to the cold linoleum and antiseptic smell of the hospital. Yusuf picks up his phone and starts watching a YouTube video about basketball dunks. Yosef stares into space. How do you think he'll die? Asks Yosef. What? Who? Yusuf doesn't put down his phone. The person whose heart you'll get. Why do you always say it's me? Yusuf sounds exasperated. He looks up from his game. You've been sicker longer than me. I bet you'll get one first. I may be too sick already, says Yosef sadly. They're not going to waste a heart on me if they think it won't last. You're not too sick, Yusuf says. Your liver function was better than mine tonight. Well, whatever. How do you think the donor is going to die? For sure, motorcycle accident. Don't they call them donor cycles? It depends how he crashes. He might be too messed up. Matters how he falls, like if his skull is all bashed in, but his body is okay. Yeah, Yosef is quiet. It's weird, isn't it? Wishing that someone will die. Well, we're not killing the guy, says Yusuf, and in a way, a little part of the donor stays alive. Well, that creeps me out even more, I think. What if he was an asshole? Will I suddenly turn into one too? Suddenly, laughs Yusuf. Come on, bro, it doesn't work that way. It might, insists Yosef. I heard of someone who hated tomatoes and then got a new heart, and now he loves tomatoes. What if we get a girl's heart and then we love boys, so we turn gay? Silence. Then both boys erupt with laughter. Nah, not gonna happen. Not with our boob obsessions. Like Howard as well, I wrote this book before October 7th, and I'm really glad I did, because I will admit that it has been difficult to feel a shared humanity since then, especially recently, as we hear of the hostages ordeals and we've seen the rampant anti-Semitism across the world. But I truly, in my heart, believe that the only chance for a peaceful world is if we try to push aside our pain and see each other as human beings. And I hope that will be a message that readers take away from my book. Thank you.
So much, Rebecca. There's really no better place to see that shared humanity than in an Israeli hospital, I have to say. Right. Okay, you guys can all put your questions in the chat. I'm going to add everybody, all the authors, to the spotlight and ask to unmute as you're thinking of your questions. Spotlight and spotlight. There we go. Here's all four of us. On and Helen and Howard, you should unmute yourselves. There we go. Okay. Nobody has put any questions in the chat, so I will start. Okay. Some of you talked already a little bit about this, but I was wondering how it feels to have your stories out in the world now in this post October 7th world reality that we're all living in.
Well, I'll answer one thing if I can. Since I'm a new writer, one of the ways I decided to publicize is through Instagram. And I've been messaging from my book Instagram account, just hundreds of what these called book Instagrammers. And while a lot of them, my book is not really political, a lot of them have been open and said, I never really knew anything about Israel, and this is nice to hear. And I've only really gotten 2 people pushing back saying, Israel is a genocidal state, blah, blah, blah. But I would say in general, I've had so many people from across the country that have just said, this is so interesting, and I'm glad to hear another perspective. So that's been a positive surprise.
I completely lost my sense of humor after October 7th. And I wrote this book, beforehand. And so there's humor in there that's good to sometimes reread and remember what that was like. I'm getting it back slowly, but October 7th changed me forever. So I'm not sure I could write this kind of book, since then, to tell you the truth.
What about you?
If I have to respond to that, I think that the cataclysm of October 7th for Israelis, I don't think it measures, there have been parallels made to the Holocaust, but I don't think it's an adequate equality. But there is a very severe post-traumatic stress disorder that millions of people in Israel feel, and certainly the people who were survivors of the kibbutzim and the survivors of the Nova Festival. And so I think that my book is more relevant, if anything, because it really addresses those themes of how we can overcome terrible trauma and still maintain optimism and humanity. I hope to think that. Thank you.
Now let me shift gears for a second. I think someone's about to write a question for you, Helen, in the chat, but I don't see it. I only see for Helen. So keep writing your question. Rebecca, you mentioned that Severin was the most fun you had to write as the Catholic priest because you had to use your imagination. But I would say that you all had to use your imagination for every character. But I wanted to ask Helen and Howard also, like, what was the most fun for, and Rebecca, you're welcome to answer your second most fun thing. What was the most fun part for you of writing your stories or your novel? Helen, why don't you go first?
I have to think about that. I mean, I think writing in general is just like fun because it puts you in another mode and it gets you out of yourself and it gets you onto the page and it gives you stimulation and creativity. So that's what I would say. I don't know which particular character I loved most. There was one lady I knew when I was growing up, and she was a very snobby German Jewish person. She was upper middle class, and she just didn't, she was very anti-Jewish. She never did anything with Judaism, and she turned away from it. And after the lead up to the 6-Day War, when she saw that Israel might be annihilated, she suddenly became terrified and couldn't drag herself away from the television. And her hero became Abba Eban, who spoke beautiful, mellifluous English, and she thought he was like a member of the British royal family. And I loved creating Hilda Gruenstein and seeing her transformation. So that was one character I like. I got close to all my characters during the story, so.
Zelda also. I mean, I thought it was so real the way you created her. This, all of a sudden, this tiny state of Israel is in danger, and finally she feels some identification with her people. Howard, what about you? Most fun part?
They say there are two kinds of writers. This is a generalization. There are plotters and pantsers. The writers among you have probably heard that. A plotter outlines every single scene, every single detail, every single action for their characters. A pantser is by the seat of their pants. And I discovered that as a nonfiction writer, I'm very much a plotter, but as a fiction writer, I'm a pantser. I know where I want a scene to end. I know how I want things to end up, but how they get there, I let the characters go off on their own. And it's fun, when you're in that moment and the protagonists tell me exactly what they would say in this situation and how they would get to the ending that I want to go to. It's a little bit of a generalization. There was some method to the madness, but to me that was fun and freeing, and also that I get to I think of reading, especially fiction, as a participatory sport between the writer and the reader. So I don't have to say everything. I don't have to put every single thought in their heads. I don't have to say every action they take. So it's fun for me to think about the readers as guessing what's going on, and leading them toward a conclusion. But if they reach a different conclusion, that's fine too. So it's fun thinking of the audience and this kind of give and take.
Anything else to add about the fun part of your writing?
Well, I thought it was interesting, Helen, that you had a taxi driver named Shmulik, because I have a taxi driver named Srulik in my book. I would say he's one of my favorite characters because he's actually based on a real person, my cousin Srulik, my maternal grandmother's first cousin. He lives in Ramat Gan, Israel, and he just turned 100 years old on Thursday. He is a Holocaust survivor. He was liberated from Bergen-Belsen 80 years ago, spent 2 years in Sweden, and then came to Israel and was one of those people that was given a gun with no instruction and told, go fight. But he is truly one of my inspirations in life for his resilience and all of the hard things he's gone through. And I wanted to honor him as well. And so in my book, he weaves through all the chapters as just this taxi driver that connects with everyone. Doesn't matter their race, doesn't matter their religion. And I would say he's the character I want to be. That's what I aspire to in life. And so it was nice to have a true role model to be doing this and to try to put him onto paper and introduce him to the world.
Well, happy birthday to him, 100 years old.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you.
wow. Okay, we had a couple questions in the chat. Rebecca mentioned difficulties, and this is from Rona. Rebecca mentioned difficulties in finding publishers for Jewish themes. Did the other writers here find the same? And what advice would you have for Jewish writers looking for publishers? Who wants to start?
I
Go
can
ahead.
start. But my publisher, Vine Leaves Press, is very much the exception to the rule. They welcome Jewish voices, Israeli voices, and I've been very happy with them. I got the publishing contract before October 7, but even since October 7, they've been very supportive. Have taken on new Jewish and Israeli authors, and are very much the exception. So that's the plug for my publisher. But in general, I've written a lot about this. I've interviewed for my book and for my journalism projects many authors who have gone through this, and it's difficult. The advice, though, I was at in America at AWP in Los Angeles a couple of months ago, and I went to a Jewish Book Council event where, I heard some really interesting things from them, and one of them was that the answer is not to fight it, but the answer is to keep writing anyway and find publishers that will listen to your voice, and they are out there, and show that even though the so-called wisdom right now is nobody here wants to hear from Jewish and Israeli voices, that Jews actually do buy books, and we do write books, believe it or not. Strange but true. And so show how when agents say, well, there's no market for it right now, prove them wrong. Yeah, of course there's a market for Jewish books, because we read them, we write them, and we buy them. And so that the only way to fight it is to show them how they're wrong.
Yeah, sure. Helen, Rebecca, you want to talk about your publishing paths at all? Right.
I feel like I already said it, and now it's like now I can tell you how it's been, which has just been so far very supportive from the Jewish community. From the non-Jewish community, I've only had one event so far. I did a podcast in Texas with 2 women who call themselves cultural Christians, and they couldn't have been nicer. The podcast was actually so boring because they just kept saying, we just loved your book so much. And I said, talk about something else. But and I just booked something else in Texas, actually. So I don't know if that's part of the evangelical Christians loving Israel, or if these people are seeing that the book really isn't political and they're just interested in it. But now it's more, where is this going to go? Is it going to get anywhere?
What about you and your publishing path?
I think that I would say that it would be very good for somebody if they had connections to reach out to publishing. It would be very, very good if they would be on social media, if they would have lots of different accounts like Instagram, TikTok, TikTok, Facebook, and if they were very, very active and they made all of these things, they built all these things up before they wrote the book, or when they wrote the book, they would have this sort of electronic and social media resume ready for publishers. So that's the advice I could give. I'm not sure how useful that is, but I think that people who write, they write like, and then they need a publisher, or, we all have things that we didn't publish, and I'm very lucky that I did publish this book. I have a ton more things. But I think that our main impetus is not publishing, but once we do enter the publishing process, it's very important for us to get exposure, but it's not an easy path.
Right. We're not doing this to for Parnassa. We're not like it's yeah, there was someone who said to me, like, when my book was coming, like, oh, so you're gonna quit your day job now and become a full-time writer? I'm like, well, what planet are you living on? It doesn't work that way. Anyway, but yeah, I liked what all of you said. We should say, Helen, that your publisher, Amsterdam Publishers, also specifically does Holocaust books, right? A lot of memoirs and some
Mostly
fiction.
memoirs, mostly
Yeah.
memoirs, and
Yeah.
some fiction, yes.
So, and we've had other authors who have published with Amsterdam and with Vine Leaves Press at Literary Modiin. So, and who's your publisher, Rebecca? Remind me.
Called Arbitrary Press.
Okay.
I don't know that he has a genre yet. I'm only his 10th
Okay.
book.
Okay.
But he's not Jewish, and I think I'm his first Jewish book. So
You never know. Like, you never know what's going to resonate. My publisher is a small press from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. When I first looked at the list of authors he had, I didn't see any like overtly Jewish names on the list. And my first story in the book is very Jewish. It starts at Purim, and it like with a shochet, someone dressed as a shochet, ends on Pesach and Seder. And this non-Jewish guy from Winston-Salem, North Carolina liked it enough to keep reading and publish the whole thing. So you never know. Okay, so Jeffrey, I don't know if this is a question, but he said another theme. My mother often and instinctively went out of her way to pretend when meeting strangers that she was not Jewish, but rather that she was Catholic. This could be another one of your characters. I think that's for you. Hesse, thank you all authors. Howard's romance rings so many bells for me, being of a certain age. Is the song poem in your book set to music yet? And have you returned to the clarinet or any other musical playing? Has your wife decided to play duets with you of any sort?
Well, I'll answer some of those questions, but I have been one reviewer told me that they wish that these musicians were real because they wanted to hear the music so bad. When I wrote the song, I'm not a songwriter, but I put myself inside these characters, and I wrote songs that I thought that they would write. So I could write songs as somebody else. I could never write a song as me. But I imagine, what Kate or what Jake's Judaism and what Kate's Christianity might have brought to a song, and how that kind of meshed together into kind of this beautiful sound that went viral. I haven't played clarinet since high school. I think I sold it on eBay decades ago, and haven't been back since. But I based the character on, if I have a brother who's the musician of the family who could hear any tune on the radio and immediately play it on the piano. So there's music in my blood. It kind of skipped over me genetically. As for my wife playing duets with me, I did get her a ukulele for her birthday a couple of years ago, but that's been sitting in the attic. So that's the answer to that.
Explain why you're sitting in a hotel room now in Pittsburgh and not in Michigan, your home.
Right. Well, we're empty nesters now, so we get to do things without our kids, and one of them was going to more concerts. So we're in Pittsburgh because for the last show of Pearl Jam's world tour, we drove 8 hours from northern Michigan to Pittsburgh just for this show. And it probably has more to do with my wife wanting to meet Eddie Vedder because she would absolutely marry him. But whatever, it's we're having fun in the beginnings of our old age. So
Wendy has also a comment. It strikes me that one of the great gifts of writing fiction is that you are forced into the world of your imagination, away from the restrictions of concrete, separate reality. And then the imaginary world is something that the writer is making real on a different level of reality. Yeah, what is that? There's a quote about like that fiction is truer than, I forget the quote exactly, but like fiction is truer than life or nonfiction or something like that. I forget who said it and what the quote is, but absolutely. Okay, I don't see any more questions unless any of you have questions for each other.
No, but I'm really excited to read both of your books. So thank you.
Yes.
I loved your quote. I loved your quote, Rebecca. I wrote it down. It said, it was ironic that as the two Joes got weaker, their friendship gets stronger. That was very
Yeah.
beautiful. I was struck
Thank
by
you.
that.
Okay, so I want to say two more things, which is that save the date, or you can already register for our June event, which is going to be June 22nd. And it is featuring I think Margot Singer, who's I think on the call, or she was on the call before, in her new essay collection, Secret Agent Man, Danny Goodman with his novel Americaland, and Emanuela Barash Rubenstein with her novel Intimate Solitude. So you can go ahead and sign up for that. I'll send it also in the thank you tomorrow. And as we've been doing since October 7th, unfortunately, we've had to saying this prayer for the hostages, and I pray that this is the last literary Modiin that I will have to say this for. But you can sharing my screen. You can follow along in the English or in Hebrew that I'm going to read now. משברך אבותינו ואימותינו אברהם ושרה יצחק ורבקה יעקב לאה ורחל ואת לוחמינו יהושע דוד ויהודה דבורה יעל ויהודית. הוא יברך את שבויי ונעדרי צה"ל והאזרחים והאזרחיות החטופים והחטופות הנתונים והנתונות בשביה ובצרה. יהי רצון לפניך אדוני צבאות שתפדה נפשם משבי ותחזירם במהרה לארצם למשפחתם ולביתם בריאים ושלמים בגופם ובנפשם, ותיתן תבונה בלב העמלים לשחרורם, ותיתן רחמים בלב שוביהם, יקוים בהם הכתוב, כל ברמה נשמע נהי בכי תמרורים, רחל מבכה על בניה, מענה להנחם על בניה, כי איננו כה אמר אדוני מנעי קולך, מבכי ועינייך מדמעה, כי יש שכר לפעולתך, נאום אדוני, ושבו מארץ אויב, ויש תקווה לאחריתך, נאום אדוני, ושבו בנים ובנות לגבולם. And that is from Sefer Yirmiyahu, the book of Jeremiah, the original, not mine. So thank you. I want to say thank you very, very much. Yes, I can send the prayer. This is was written by Rav Goren, who was one of the first chief rabbis, I think, of Israel, or of the IDF. I don't remember. It's not the one that's in the Siddur that we use in Maishol, but I heard it already like a year and a bit ago, and I decided I like this one better. So I will send that. Thank you so much to Rebecca, Helen, and Howard, and to all of you who have been with us today.
Thank you.
Go out
Thank
and
you.
get their books and read their books, and hope to see you again soon, and end with the Besorot Tovot, which is what we say here. May we hear good news soon.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.